Well, let's go ahead and get started, everyone. Go to the next slide, please. Welcome everyone to our first full meeting of the North Carolina Task Force on Child Care and Early Education's Finance and Funding Work Group. I'm Kimberly Malady, the Senior Policy Advisor at the Division of Child Development and Early Education. I'm happy to be staffing this group and working with you all. Also want to recognize Jane Chuley from DHHS and Nicole Boone from DCDE as well, also supporting us work. We have a short meeting agenda, but a big topic today. We're going to focus on the child care endowment recommendation. I know during our short meeting in August, we touched on this for just a moment, but we have some data from other states we'd like to share, and then just start the discussion around this work for North Carolina. And we are planning to end at 2. Go to the next slide. Before we get started, I do want to review some policies and procedures. Work group members, please be advised that state public records policy applies to this work group as well as to the larger task force. This means that the meeting recording as well as notes produced from the meeting are a matter of public record. If you're a work group member who is not a state employee and you need to complete a public records training, please reach out after the meeting so we can help schedule that for you. Also want to share a reminder that the meetings of the task force and its work groups are public meetings. Notices for these meetings are available online at the North Carolina Secretary of State's Office Public Meetings calendar. And today's meeting is open to the public via live stream to the North Carolina Department of Commerce's YouTube channel. Work group members, please be advised that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The next slide, I want to read aloud the conflict of interest disclosure. This is also read aloud at the top of each task force meeting. In accordance with State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every committee member to avoid both conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest. If any committee member has any known conflict of interest or is aware of facts that might create the appearance of such conflict, with respect to any matters coming before the committee today, please identify the conflict or the facts that might create the appearance of a conflict to ensure that any inappropriate participation in that matter may be avoided. If at any time a new matter raises a conflict during the meeting, please be sure to identify it at that time. Do any work group members have any conflicts to share at this time? Let's move into our agenda. Thank you. So a reminder of our work group purpose. This work group is tasked with engaging in implementation planning for recommendations developed by this task force regarding financial funding. So our guiding questions will focus on how recommendations can be achieved, who should be at the table, and what resources will be required. Our work group duties will follow task force guiding principles with an eye toward continuous progress, solutions-based approaches, public and private solutions. And our goal is to advance implementation plans at regularly held meetings. We do have a draft implementation form I'll be sharing after this meeting, so you can begin considering how we can complete those plans during the course of our discussions. We are going to provide the task force with a progress update. Our next task force report is due December 31st, so our updates should be included there. And then if there are any new recommendations related to finance and funding, then this work group's work may expand to include implementation planning for this. The next slide. So today's discussion is going to focus on the creation of a child care endowment to fund child care needs. We touched on this briefly in August, And we've since then done a little research with some other states. So we wanted to share that with you today. And we'll start with some information on the request. So Jane, Nicole, and I were able to speak with them yesterday. And they have a fund that has been in place since 2006. And it utilizes a combination of state funds and private funds. And the state funds come from the Educational Lands and Trust Fund. This did require a constitutional amendment to allow the state to use the interest off those state funds for childcare. It is controlled by a board of trustees. There are 6 members that are appointed by the governor, and it does include childcare providers. They use their funds for grants to public school districts. And it really focuses on quality initiatives for infant and toddlers in centers and family childcare homes. So either in the public school setting or they're partnering with private facilities. It is tied to QRIS in that their STEPS program, you have to be at step 3, 4, or 5, similar to our 3, 4, and 5-star licensure levels to participate. In their most recent grant cycle, they issued about $9.6 million to school districts, and about $2 million of that were private dollars. And it's just an overview of Nebraska. This morning, we talked with Connecticut, and so that's the next slide. Theirs is a more recent endowment, just created in July 2025, and they utilize state surplus funds. And so 300 million is how it started. They did note that because part of their driving force of surplus funds is based on sort of incomes in the area, that it can vary significantly from year to year. So that amount could increase in future years. In the first 2 years, 12% of that endowment is going to go to the Office of Early Childhood. And then after that, it would be 10%. And this is controlled by an advisory board. And it includes business leaders, philanthropic leaders, the governor's office, House and Senate representatives, and then it's managed by the state treasurer's office. This one is interesting, I think, because it really gets at teacher compensation and the cost of care. And so their goal by 2027 is that state funded providers are required to pay their early childhood educators on par with public school teachers. So closing that gap in compensation. And then also families making $100,000 or less would have a 0 copay beginning in 2026. And so some of this is codified in law. So that's just an overview there. And then for the next slide, know of a few other states that we're trying to connect with and bring information back to you all. So we're in the process of connecting with Montana, New Mexico, and Arizona. So what we would like to know from you all is what questions you have sort of based on the overview that we have from these other 2 states, and what things you think might be helpful. And then also keep in mind, our next slide is going to talk about what is the purpose of our endowment. So in Nebraska, it was really quality supports and professional development, versus Connecticut, which is compensation and the cost for families. So 2 very different models of how they're using the funds to support childcare. So I'll turn it over to you all, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Any questions that were sparked by our overview of Nebraska and Connecticut?
Kimberly, if any of the models have that information, I'm just curious about anybody that is offering grants or loans for startup costs in their model for new programs, and if that's considered a grant or a loan? And if so, if it's a loan, is it 0% interest, or kind of like what's happening on that end?
Great question.
I can say that New Mexico offers grant loan programs. I also want to just be very, very clear that I am the furthest person from being any kind of an expert. I just read some stuff Leanna sent me, and I remember that. But I can say that New Mexico does offer grants to just excuse me, I just lost my page. Low interest long term loans to providers to expand and create new facilities.
So for expanding and starting up, then. Is that what you just said?
Yes, and that's the extent of the detail that I have. Again, I'm not an expert. I happen to know that one little tidbit.
That's great. Nicole shared
And
with
I
me
had
the Arizona opportunity, and I think
Okay.
they use maybe tax from tobacco sales. So we're gonna learn more about that. So that would be like sort of a tax approach in Arizona. I don't know if they have grants or so we can ask.
There is also Iowa has an incentive grant program to cover infrastructure and startup costs, including new facilities, renovations, and expansions.
Okay.
Just a quick question, and just so as we're evaluating, the ones that we know of so far were all from state appropriations that created the endowment, or is there part matching with private industry? What have you learned about that?
So for Nebraska, there was 40 million allocated from the lands and trust, but then there was, I think it was 20 million that was private funded. Connecticut, I think they leveraged some philanthropic resources to help advocate for the law changes. I'm not sure how much of that contribution, or if it's appeared to be mainly the surplus that they're using to fund it, and then the investment from that money and using the interest. And Jane is nodding her head, so I think we both had the same takeaway from that. But we can follow up with that question as well. So a little bit different approaches there for those two states, but we can ask that for the other states as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Kimberly, this is Beth.
How are you?
I'm good. I have three questions. One being I guess also my biggest concern about this approach. I think it's a great idea, but making sure that other investments from the general fund aren't supplanted, that this is seen as an addition to. And I'm just wondering, in other states, have they seen their general fund investments shift in terms of a reliance on the endowment to fund? So that's question one. I don't know if you want me to like pause in between the questions or what would work best for you.
I don't have an answer for it, but I wrote it down. So go right ahead. I will keep writing.
This is Jane. I'll just add that Connecticut, and this is a good question that we'll keep in mind as we're talking to all of these states, but I know specifically Connecticut, in law specified that the funds from the endowment were to supplement and not supplant any other federal or state or local funds. So that was something they specified.
That's great. So my second question was, I noticed, I don't remember which state you said, but that the first year they were going to use like 12% of their endowment principal transferred over. So theoretically, unless the interest rates are very, very high on that endowment, then they're going to use their startup money within 10 years, right? And so that's basically just like a savings account with slight interest growth. So I guess that's a question for me, is like, do you use it as a foundation almost, or are you actually just setting it aside in an account and you're spending off of essentially your principal? If that makes any sense. And
Right.
like how is that set up in the longer term?
And I think for Connecticut, it is set aside specifically for this. They're just using the interest, but that's a great question for us as we look at everything. Because it's a surplus fund that they have, and they said they obligate it before the year end closes out, or they had to do something else with the surplus. So I think it is designated for childcare, but we can follow up on that.
Okay. And then my last question kind of builds off of Gary's, which is the incentive for private contribution. When I saw Nebraska, I immediately thought, oh, that must be Warren Buffett's foundation, because I know they have a strong focus on early childhood in Nebraska. So I went and I found a link where his institute did a study of the endowment. So I can put that in the chat in a minute. But I'm just wondering, like in terms of incentivizing, obviously foundations, that's one thing, but are some of these taking private business contributions? And if so, is there a tax credit incentive, or like is there something that drives people to other than the goodness of their hearts? If that makes any sense.
Yes. Great question. Any other questions that come to mind?
Kim, this is Mika.
Yeah.
A quick question. I think this is a clarifying question. When you were giving us an overview of the Connecticut opportunity, I
Mhm.
think I think you mentioned that the money is distributed to public school districts. Is that right?
That's Nebraska, yes. They
Nebraska. Okay.
distribute it through their public school system. And they said the reason for that is that many of their areas are very rural. And so the public school houses a lot of their childcare options. And they, as a public school system, can then partner with private family childcare home providers and centers for those kinds of services. And that's the state that really focused more on professional development and QRES supports
Okay.
in their approach to how they use the money.
Okay. Thank you. Because the question that I was wondering and wading through was if it's public school districts, was that geared more towards just toddlers and kind of the pre-K age? But it sounds like that is incorrect, that it would go flow to infants as well.
Yes, they do particularly focus on the B to 3 age range. And then they had some provisions in place to ensure there wasn't a gap between, say, when you turn 3 and then when you enter their preschool program. And so they had a few details about that as well, because they were very aware that could have created a gap. And I think as long as the children were 3 at the time of the year, starting the financial year, then they cleared through with their services. So it sounded like a lot of their programs were run just through public school systems, and then it was up to each individual system to figure out who their partners might be, and that would vary by region, depending on what was around them. And then they had some oversight of it with their board of trustees situation and the endowment.
Okay, thank you. I'm clear.
Kimberly, this is Amy. I've
Yes.
had the great fortune of being with South Carolinians for Common Sense group through One Spartanburg all morning last night, and talking with them about North Carolina and looking at their opportunities ahead, starting from a much different spot, of course, but they're thinking around endowments. And I brought forward that we're looking at it at the task force, and that when I first came to NCPC and Smart Start, there was a discussion of an endowment to support to support Smart Start, which of course then supports NC Pre-K subsidy, etc. And Beth's good question about this endowment. Would it be the interest, Beth, or would you have to get into principal, and how do you really get much out of it? And got me thinking, and in talking with them about, they're much smaller numbers in South Carolina that they're talking about which of course makes us feel good in North Carolina. And then you look at the size and you say, oh, right, we've got
Yes,
a lot of
much bigger.
to do, a lot of funding needs. But I wonder if it could be set up with, and again, with talking with them, they're saying, yeah, it's really about compensation and workforce, isn't it? I said, really? It so often comes down to that. And then hearing about, I think, Connecticut's focus on compensation. Could it be that this puts us over the line finally for statewide wages or something that's like wages? You know, that so it's not, because I've been thinking, Beth, like you would need to be making, you know, like 50, 60, some of our lowball proposals for childcare funding from advocates are in the 60 million. That still would be a huge amount. But there's some that are a little lower that could have a huge impact, like statewide wages or something. Could that be what this is targeted on instead of being kind of, you know, boil the ocean with this endowment idea, but just make it a low priority, I mean, a single priority, not a low priority. And then also, I wondered about how many corporation philanthropies are participating. It sounded like one of them was almost like a 1-to-5 ratio. Is that it? I'm not sure which one of private funds matching the state investment, but would like to know about that too. Again, coming off conversations here in South Carolina is how do we incentivize businesses? How is it working for you, Amy, with TriShare? Are they just, seems like businesses would be coming out of the ground saying, yes, sign me up. And I said, oh, you'd think it, you want it, you hear it, and yet there are real challenges that businesses come up against. And so you've got to think very strategically about how you do that. So I wonder how you get that investment into a endowment as well.
And Connecticut shared a little bit of their backstory into how they got to the point of having this legislation. And I think they said it was something like 10 months or so of active listening sessions, trying to connect with businesses, advocates, partners, legislators. I mean, their governor was very on board with childcare as an economic approach versus, you know, it just like is a solution for a lot of other businesses. So it was, and it was sort of a coordinated approach, but they really did a lot of listening sessions. They had lots of iterations of their plans and posted it, and were just very, it seems, hands-on in trying to address barriers and challenges so that they got buy-in throughout the entire process. And they really tried to show their return on investment. We can share some of those links and resources with you all, but they had a really great graphic that showed what is the return on investment for having more women in the workforce, having a stronger workforce, what is the impact to children long-term, what is the impact to families long-term, and just, they really had a pretty comprehensive approach of showing what is this endowment worth to the state of Connecticut, and they looked at it that way. So a little bit of additional information there just for you guys to think about, and the task force might be a good place to start collecting some of that information from different stakeholders.
Kimberly, do any of the models that you've looked at include anything within the tactics or the incentives for new businesses coming into a state to opt into their endowment as a part of that package? I know recently out here in Western North Carolina, we have a new company moving into Graham County, which is going to produce hundreds of jobs in that little tiny county. So it's going to pull, you know, people that are working probably within 6 counties of that area into that plant. But all of a sudden, my brain goes to, oh my gosh, we don't have the childcare infrastructure to support this. So just curious if anybody has thought about how they would incorporate that into kind of like the package deal that makes an employer want to come into your state, like that early investment.
Right, that's a great thing to take note of, especially with our emphasis on all the new businesses in North Carolina. It's a great point. I'll look into that as we continue conversations. I don't remember anything specific that we talked about with them already, but we can certainly follow up with the team.
I hesitate to ask this one because I'm actually not 100% sure how I feel about it. But I know we talked at the last in-person meeting a bit about, looking at these other states that have done it. The only other one that pops up is Louisiana, right? And Louisiana is there's through, I think, sports betting and the quote unquote sin taxes. And I know that Senator Hyson raised some really good concerns about, that obviously early learning is a place where we have very broad bipartisan support. And when you pull in other issues, that complicates things, right? But I do know that across other issue areas here in North Carolina that also need revenue, people are looking at things like and sugar soda, sugary drink taxes and things like that. And I just, like I said, I'm not sure exactly how I feel about them because those are complicated conversations. But yeah, just mention it. That's the only other southern state that's doing it, and this is where they landed. And have we looked at that, or do people have?
This is Candace. I think that we have to explore all the different options. And I remember that conversation because even with the sports betting, like we already have an education for lottery, and I just don't understand the differences between how we look at both of betting and gambling. But I do think that we need to dig a little deeper. I think we just owe it to, to do our due diligence.
And it could be one of many options you all list in your implementation plan of ways to accomplish this endowment. Even if you don't land on a specific recommendation, it could be a variety of things that you all want to document as things to look at. Let's go to the next slide. Because I thought, so when I left the Nebraska meeting, I was like, oh, this is a lot like a lot of our QIS supports through Learn and Smart Start and a lot of TA and professional development. And we already have a lot of those structures in place. So it got me thinking about what is the purpose of this endowment fund. So I think that is for you all to think about and discuss. So what do you see this fund being used for? What types of services or activities would you like to see funded with this money? Should it come into effect? And then what high level requirements do you think would be in place? I mean, I know in Nebraska, they had it tied to their QRIS system. I don't think they do in Connecticut, but they also have a different type of system. They really focus on providers being accredited as a quality indicator. So for them, I think it was more about compensation and the cost of care for families. So see, Candace already has.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of start the conversation with just sharing some data so that kind of everyone knows where we are. I appreciate Connecticut's view at supporting the workforce because, if we don't have a workforce, it doesn't really matter how many programs we open if they're all empty or classrooms are empty. I will say that I know that this team doesn't really have the ability to kind of make this happen, right? We need the General Assembly to hear the recommendation. And to Beth's point, like right before we switched over to this topic, I guess my biggest question is how are we going to fund the endowment? But in the event that we do get an endowment, I would be very supportive of, and it can have multiple prongs, right? But if the main support could be tied to workforce, and I know that Connecticut is using some of that money to provide to programs to help pay their teachers at that public school teacher rate. I think that that would be super supportive. And I just want to lay out there for everyone so that we all have the same amount of knowledge about where we are right now, the fact that we don't have a budget. And so we have not had any increases in our subsidy reimbursement rates. We are seeing more programs closed than open. And this has not typically been the case. We've typically been able to see programs continue to open at a rate that is commensurate to closings, even though that doesn't really support programs that close if they're the only one in the county, right? And those parents still have to move out of county or leave the workforce, or if it's the only type of program in that county, like a developmental day program where they still have just those two options of moving out of the county or leaving the workforce. We had almost 50 programs close last month. And that number is only going to increase as long as we are not supporting our programs financially. So if that's one way to kind of support the business side of the programs is by saying, hey, we know that y'all are struggling. We're going to give you a certain amount of dollars or percentages, or I don't know how Connecticut worked it out to help them be able to pay their teachers to retain a quality workforce. I think that that is like foundational. And then from there, we can kind of grow and move on top of that.
I would just want to give a +1 to what Candace just said. Yesterday afternoon, I was on a heartbreaking phone call with a mom. Her name is Erin Tate. And I promised her I would speak her and her community into this space today. She lives on Hatteras Island. Their only childcare program is closing in October. Her family and many, many other families are massively desperate. And what that childcare provider has said is that she can't find and keep staff because she can't afford to pay them. And like the crisis that is causing for Erin's family, and then when Candace's Director Witherspoon across the state, 158 other communities are replicating exactly the pain I was hearing in Erin's voice yesterday. Like, I do feel like we have to talk about compensation. We just have to.
I would be in favor of that. As I said, I would say compensation, but I would also say what I've been trying to elevate lately is don't reinvent the wheel and don't boil the ocean. Let's really try to think about, is it that these programs aren't working, or is it that they've never been funded to actually work and have the reach, and that they're working for those that they're reaching? And so could it be just the focus on wages? Or could it be just to focus on healthcare? Could we figure out this endowment to cover healthcare, benefiting operators, providers by ensuring that all their teachers have health insurance? And could we pull in other interested private investors? Certainly, I know there are some health insurance groups out there that are really saying we want to find a way in to support the state again, and maybe there's an opportunity there. So I don't know what the numbers are. It would be good. Do we have an estimate on that? On what was our group doing that? The estimate on what would it cost to holding Medicaid expansion covered folks currently? I think we would have to go with, but then to cover others, what it would cost. Do we have an estimate for that?
I don't know. I don't
Including
know that we
family
talked
childcare?
about. I don't know that we talked about someone following up on that data. Like, I don't know that we said someone was going to work on collecting that I would think.
Yeah, I don't either. But it would be good to see if we could get an estimate on that. If we don't.
Jane, is that something that we have access to that you could help with? I know DCDEE, we don't have access to any of that information. And we can follow up.
Was that Candace? I'm sorry, you cut out for a second. Did you say my name?
Yes, I did.
Let's take that back and work on that. I think we could connect with our Medicaid folks and others and see what we can pull together.
Thank you.
I'm going to echo everything that was just said about the workforce. There's something else that I would like for us to think about, and I absolutely 100% am on board with wages across all 100 counties. But here's what I know about wages is that the people that participate in wages use those as balloon payments to pay for like car insurance and stuff like that when it comes due. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily help to increase the paycheck weekly to keep those people like being able to buy their groceries and pay their light bill and stuff like that. So I think as we move forward, and this is not, you know, I have talked to Christy Snuggs at early years about this and even asked her if there was ever a possibility where wages could turn into a quarterly reimbursement rather than a 6-month reimbursement. So it gets the money to them a little quicker. And given their current realities around the money that they have to support that, you know, from a systems perspective, it's not a possibility. But again, I would encourage us to think about that because that, I think if we could get more creative and get more money in the hands of the teachers quicker, I think that would make a difference too.
I just want to add, I appreciated the point you were making, Amy, about just adequately funding the programs that we have now. I don't want to overlook adequately funding the subsidy rates. I think, when we're talking about broad scale, making sure that the providers have the funds they need to adequately pay the workforce and to keep infrastructure in place, I feel like that's sort of the baseline. And we haven't yet really made sure that not even talking about, really funding the cost of providing care, but even keeping up with the traditional market rates that we've had. I think I just don't want us to jump past that either.
So what I'm hearing is workforce development as a foundational item, evaluating how we can support current programs, potentially benefits with healthcare, how we can pull in other investors, maybe expanding wages and increasing frequency of payments, and then funding subsidy rates. All great. Okay, so lots of good purposes, but anything else that we might need to list? Yep, and we are working on the market rate, full rate, all of that. We'll have more information for you at our upcoming meetings, and that was a recommendation as well. We had to, and we talked about that a little bit, but we show data to help with that discussion. See. Anything else? So the types of services and activities I think we have covered. Are there some sort of requirements that you think might be important to consider for finding recipients? That we're going to make a note of for you.
The only thing I think that going to services and activities, I feel like we're in crisis mode, so we're looking at like what are the needs right now. But I do think we need to lift up the fact that there are pretty desperate families out there. We have subsidy waiting lists. And we also know that not even everybody who's eligible for subsidy is on the subsidy waiting list. everybody who would be eligible for North Carolina pre-K is not being served by North Carolina pre-K. And so I think that like those are also urgent needs. And so I just want to make sure those don't get lost as well.
Any other thoughts about this? We're going to give just a few minutes back of your time. Unless anyone has any other updates they want to share, we can go to our next slide. I just wanted to remind everyone the next full task force meeting is October 6th at the Albemarle building. There will be time for this work group to join that agenda. And then I've scheduled another work group meeting for November 12th, 11 to 12. And so that'll be virtual. We'll be sending out a level for that. I think we might have a team saved one, but since public notice, it's easier with WebEx, so I'll be sending it up to the link to that. Any closing thoughts from anyone or things that you might need before October?
Just another thought that's coming to mind on requirements. And Beth, as you were talking, I was agreeing that we were thinking about like immediate needs as appropriate. And my brain started to go to kind of any future needs. And I'm thinking about Amy talking about not just really thinking about the programs that we need to make sure don't close, but also the ones that need to be there for the future. And I'm remembering one of the presentations in terms of like capital expenditures, fences, et cetera, that folks may need. So I'm just putting that out on the table. If there's in terms of requirements, not requirements, but activities and services, if we could also be thinking about sustaining needs in some portion, and with the bulk obviously going towards the greater immediate crisis. But if we have an endowment fund that's well supported and well funded, if a portion of it could think about sustaining or even future needs, I would love to put that on the table for consideration.
Well, we hope to have more information to share with you from those remaining states that we had mentioned, Arizona, New Mexico, Montana. We'll also look at Iowa and do that. Any other comments or questions we can help with? Oh, and Louisiana. Thank you, Beth. Yes, I will put that on our list as well. We appreciate your time and great conversation. This helps us a lot with finding more information for you. So I hope you guys have a great afternoon. We will see you in October.
Thank you all.